Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. Massive riots broke out across our country, race riots that even I, as a middle-class white girl from a small southern town, could not ignore. I didn't have a clue what these riots meant, but I knew that the anger and frustration and violence I saw on the TV screen meant that something important was happening in our nation. That was the same year that Robert Kennedy was assassinated a couple of months later, and the year at the Democratic National Convention that riots broke out in the streets of Chicago. This was the year when the media coverage from Vietnam finally exploded my own protective bubble and caused me to begin to question the morality of that war. It was also the year I attended the first funeral of a high school friend who had died in Vietnam. My first aha experience with nature, about nature, took place on New Year's Eve of that year. For some strange reason that I still don't understand why, I was not partying on New Year's Eve, but was attending a worship service at a national conference for college students. As we approached the midnight hour, the auditorium went dark. A big screen descended on the stage. The creator of this multimedia presentation brought together real-life images from that tragic and traumatic year and blended them with music that we Southern Baptists at that time would have called secular music. Dustin, you know about that. Let me just say I'd never experienced anything like this in my church growing up. Not only in terms of real music being played, but also in terms of real life images being projected in such a graphic way in a service of holy worship. At least in my mind, I was mesmerized by this, as were the thousands of teenagers from across our nation who filled that room. Now, there were probably some national staff members from the Southern Baptist Church who were holding their breath, wondering if they would be fired immediately after this service. Rock music, images of war and racism and hatred and poverty, all in a Baptist worship service. Nancy, did you ever experience anything like that? I was holding my breath, just waiting for some preacher to come on stage and for the music to change from Bob Dylan to an organ playing Just As I Am. I was preparing myself to be told that everything we had just seen and heard on that giant screen was of the devil. I expected that right as the clock struck 12, we would hear what we Baptists called an invitation. An invitation to repent before it was too late. An invitation to turn our lives around from this godless world and give them all to Jesus. I was waiting, expecting these things, but that's not what happened. Instead, as the clock struck 12 midnight, what appeared on the screen was an image that took not only my breath, but my soul away. There was the earth rising out of the darkness over the moon's horizon. These images had been captured just a week before by the Apollo 8 astronauts and broadcast back to Earth on Christmas Eve. Here was our small and fragile but incredibly beautiful planet rising out of the darkness of space. Allow yourselves to take in the power of that image. An image that changed not only my life, but that would change our world. This image juxtaposed with the images of violent and horrid realities from that year indeed changed my life forever. For in those moments, for the first time, I fell in love with the earth. And I knew that the life of my own spirit was intimately connected with the lives of all God's people, whether they lived beside the rice paddies in Vietnam, in the slums of our own inner cities. And that night, I knew that the life of my spirit was also connected with the life of this precious world that God entrusted to our care. Yesterday, at the end of our Walk Gently on Earth retreat, a participant told me that this was the first time they had ever made a connection between loving Jesus and loving our world. It was the first time they had experienced how caring about the environment is related to deepening one's own spiritual life. They had never considered that they could strengthen their faith by learning to walk gently on the earth. As I heard this, my heart leapt with joy, and it caused me to come home last night and rewrite today's sermon as I remembered my own first moments of making those connections. The connections between loving Jesus and loving our planet. A planet that is becoming for me not simply the place where I reside, but a living, breathing being with whom I want to fall in love in deeper ways each and every day for the rest of my life. There's a quotation by Wendell Berry that we used yesterday on the retreat that is printed in your bulletins. I invite you to read it silently and to allow it to help you reflect on your own life.